Hello, hello, this is Gemini, your friendly neighborhood spy. I'm here today to do a little bit of drawing. As you can see, I'm doing a time-lapse video of a drawing that I recently did of Matthew. It's meant to be a drawing of what like a fallen Matthew would look like. I thought it'd be fun to do that since the fallen banner's coming up soon. And it's been a little while since the last time I did a drawing video. I love to draw, it's like one of my favorite hobbies. And I've never done a voiceover with one of my drawings before, so it was something I wanted to try out. So let me know what you think of the format, if you like videos like this, where I draw something and just kind of talk about it while I draw. And maybe I'll do some more in the future. I've drawn Matthew like so many times over the years. He's like, since he's my favorite character, I draw him quite a bit. You can trace a lot of my skill as an artist by looking back at all of my different Matthew drawings. And you can see that I've definitely grown a lot as an artist since I first started doing all of these Matthew drawings. I've drawn Matthew for most of the Fire Emblem Heroes seasonal themes, not all of them, but quite a few of them. It was kind of a way to practice my drawing skills while also giving myself Matthew welts since IS doesn't seem to want to give me any. Even though I've grown a lot as an artist over the years, I very much consider myself to be a novice artist. I don't have a lot of formal training with art. I took one art class in college, and I just, obviously like the yearly fine arts classes in high school. So most of what I know as an artist is mostly just from practicing and watching a few videos on YouTube here and then. And I have a lot to learn about things like shading and lighting and anatomy. But I am also, I'm happy with the growth that I've had over the years. So this is, it's just something I like to do. I think it's a really fun hobby. I find drawing really, really relaxing, and because of that, I thought it'd be kind of fun to share. If any of you are more adept artists than myself, I'm very open to feedback, so if you have anything you want to tell me in the comments, that'd be great. As for this specific drawing, like I said, it's meant to be based off the Fallen banner. Well, I'm definitely not expecting Matthew to get a Fallen alt this year, or maybe even ever. I think there is like some precedent for it, so it's technically in the realm of possibility while not being very likely. And that's mostly because he has art from the Fire Emblem Cipher cards where it's like an assassin version of Matthew. And I am going to be discussing like spoilers for Matthew's character throughout this video, so just keep that in mind. One of Matthew's Cipher cards is meant to be like him as an assassin after Layla's death. And it's actually called Elegy for a Flower, I believe is the English translation, with Layla being the flower, and it's clearly him in grief, and I think it's supposed to be him having signed the Fell contract and become an assassin to make sure that he's strong enough to complete the mission now that Layla is gone and can't help. Even though first and foremost, I love Matthew's like lighthearted, cheerful nature. But I do think this version of Matthew is very interesting, even though it's not like my preferred version of Matthew. I like him. I like Matthew happy. But I do think it's really interesting to see him, a character that's much more lighthearted and happy most of the time, dealing with this grief and loss. And in Fire Emblem 7, I've always felt like he handles it pretty maturely. He doesn't react in like this very angry, upset way. He kind of he accepts her loss and just sort of is obviously harmed by it. You can hear the sound of his heartbreak in the scene after they find her dead. Just in the music itself, it's really hard for me every time I replay that game getting to that part, and I replay it a lot because it's my favorite. But it's really tough to listen to. But even though you can tell he's suffering a lot, he accepts that it's happened. And all he can really do is try to go forward and recognize that Layla wouldn't want him to give up. And obviously that changes a bit once he has interactions with Jafar, but in the immediate moment after losing her, that's kind of how he handles it. So this is meant to be based off his Cipher art, in which that isn't really what happened. This is more like Matthew, who's become much darker and more serious and more affected by his grief, and is maybe even outright hunting for Jafar, looking for revenge. It's hard to say exactly just from one card, but that's kind of the gist that I got from the card. It's not an exact replica of his design from that, but it's inspired by it, I would say. I wanted to include Layla in the background kind of as like a ghost that's haunting him throughout. And I also included this like wristband that he's wearing that's like a piece of fabric tied around his wrists, and it's meant to be like a scrap of cloth taken from Layla's cloak that he just keeps with him. You know, even after he's buried her, he just has that part of her with him still. So I had a number of different ideas for what Fallen Matthew would be like mechanically. I'm a big fan of infantry units, so that's probably what I would keep him as, but I think it'd be nice to get a sword version of Matthew since he does actually use swords in FE7. But he could just as easily be like a red dagger unit as well. I think it'd be nice for him to be something besides a colorless dagger, since that already is what he is in Fire Emblem Heroes, but I also wouldn't complain if he was a colorless dagger user, but it'd be kind of cool to get like a red dagger instead. I would love for him to have some kind of effect where he has like a terrain effect that's kind of based off like caltrops. So like he drops caltrops in the area around his target. And that would do something like slow movement for unit types other than flyers. It doesn't really make sense that caltrops would affect flyers, but I think the other unit types could all be slowed by them. Obviously he would have lethality as his special. I think he'd have to have something to like boost how quickly he gets his special, maybe the slaying effect or a built-in +1 to his special cooldown, or maybe something like Flash Fire Sparrow. Is that what that one's called? The one that's basically Flashing Blade and Swift Sparrow combined. Whatever that skill is called. But something like that to boost his special. I also like the idea of him having something built into his kit where, and obviously this is something like I think everybody wants at this point, but something where he would be able to evade before combat damage, because Matthew is very fast and very evasive. I think it'd be really cool for him to have some kind of effect where it's almost like a duplicated version of him, like a shadow version of him that takes the prior damage for him. That'd be like the idea behind it. Yeah, where like before the combat starts, there's like almost like a mirror image of him that takes the before damage instead, and that way he doesn't have to take it. I think that would be a good way, like lore-wise, to handle that, especially because there is some precedent in the Fire Emblem series for mirror images. It's never really been much of a mechanic, but like you see it in a lot of characters, like battle sprites and stuff, especially when they crit. As I've discussed before on the channel, I'm not really somebody who goes back into the meta that much and doesn't follow it very closely, so it's not really the biggest deal to me one way or the other what he does mechanically. Obviously, I'd want him to be usable and able to, you know, use them in the game modes that I play. But it's fun to me to think that Matthew would have some kind of, like, cool meta ability that it would be, like, highly desired. I'd especially love if he was an attuned or rearmed hero. Though as for, like, this year's actual Fallen banner, my expectations for the roster are probably, I think there's a really good chance of Fallen Veil. I actually have I've been thinking for a while that I feel like Veil is going to be like a rearmed dagger on the Fallen banner. I wouldn't be surprised if we get both a rearmed and an attuned hero on the Fallen banner this year. I don't know if we'd ever get an ascended hero. It just feels in such opposition to the Fallen banner because it's fallen and ascended. You know, one is falling downwards, one is ascending upwards. It just doesn't feel like it would fit thematically. So I'm thinking we'll get Veil. I also am hoping that we see, obviously I'd want Matthew more, but since I don't think that's likely, I think it'd be really nice to get like Fallen Lloyd Reed, especially since we got Linus last year, and Lloyd really deserves something, you know, between his art being pretty subpar in Heroes and not having gotten anything despite having been in the game for so long, and he's such a popular character. I'm hoping we'll get him. Other than that, there's still a lot of options. We could get the Deadlord heroes from Thracia. We got Maria last year, but we could get the other ones that are also like kind of captured by Medius in New Mystery of the Emblem. We could get so many Engage heroes we could potentially get between Morian and Hyacinth, Alir. We could get, honestly, we could get Fallen versions of the Emblem heroes. We could get like the alternate universe characters from the DLC. Like there's so many options from Engage. I don't know if it'll be like all Engage heroes this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's more than one. So that's what I'm actually expecting, even though like, you know, even though a Matthew Walt is the thing I want most, but that's kind of where I think the trajectory is going for the Fallen banner this year. But to get back to Matthew, the subject of my adoration. So what I had in mind for this version of Matthew, more like lore-wise, would be, like I said, it's connected to his cipher art, and that this is a version of Matthew, like an AU version of him that wasn't able to get past his grief, that really wasn't able to process it, and is kind of haunted by Layla. Like, that's why her ghost is behind him in the image. And I spent a lot of time thinking about what the Forging Bonds event would be like, because, like, that's what I would really be all about for this. And I see it being, like, Matthew who is, like, maybe out looking for Jafar, you know, because he wants to get his revenge. And he encounters the other Ostian characters, and, like, they're all like, why is he acting so different? You know, because Matthew's normally, like, such a chill guy and is so, like, silly and lighthearted, and they're like, why is he, like, being so serious? And it would mostly be, I think, Hector and Sierra, and then Layla would also be there, and when Fallen Matthew interacts with them, he doesn't even seem to see that Layla's there, and they all think it's really weird, and they start trying to, like, figure out what's going on with him and try to find him and, you know, stop him from whatever nefarious intentions he has. And each of them, like, tries talking to him at some point in some way, and they just can't seem to get through to him. And he's, like, threatening anyone that gets in his way as he's, like, trying to hunt down Jafar. And then how I see it going at the end, just as he's, like, finding Jafar and is about to, like, make his attack, he gets confronted, not by Layla. That's, like, I think that's what they would probably do if they actually did a Fallen Matthew. But I actually think it's a lot more interesting if it's not Layla that confronts him at the end, but base Matthew, like the regular version of Matthew. Because the way I'm interpreting this version of Matthew is that he's, like, so overcome by his grief over Layla that he can't even see that, like, Layla is there in Asker and is actually, like, he could be with her now. He can see her, he can interact with her, he can talk with her. But he's just so blinded and overwhelmed by his grief that he can't actually, like, he can't see her anymore. He just sees, like, the ghost version of her that's, like, with him all the time. So it's regular Matthew that has to actually confront him, and that makes it a little bit like one of those, like, scenes that you might have seen in, like, an anime or something where, like, a character's possessed and they have, like, a battle in their own mind against their own consciousness. And it'd be kind of like that, where it's like, it's base Matthew, regular Matthew is talking to Fallen Matthew and and he has to convince himself to get past this destruction, this anger, this grief that's not helping anyone at this point, you know, because, like, Layla is here in Asker and there's no reason for this, and even if she wasn't, you know, he has to recognize that this isn't what she would want for him, one way or the other. Like, she would never want him to spiral like this. She would never want him to sink into this grief. She wouldn't want him to give up, which is exactly what he says in the actual game after he finds out about her death, that he knows that she would want him to keep going, and she would never forgive him if he gave up. And even though this Fallen Matthew hasn't really given up, he's definitely given into his grief. So, like, regular Matthew would kind of have to talk him through that and make him see that this is not what Layla would ever want from him. And then the way that I see the Forging Bonds wrapping up would be Fallen Matthew is able to see Layla and Asker, but he also knows that he's not really quite able to get past like, he's been affected by his grief in a way that even when he's able to recognize that and kind of set it aside, he can't really go back to being how he was before, and he can't really go back to, you know, being with Layla. So what he does is he actually kind of becomes, like, a protective shadow to regular Matthew and Layla, because he sees that they can be together now and they can be happy in a way that he can't be, so he wants to protect that for them, and that's kind of the way his Forging Bonds would wrap up. And it breaks my heart to think about Matthew in a state like that, because I want him to be happy and I want him to be okay, and I want him to be able to be with Layla like he is in Asker right now. But I just think that would be a really interesting, like, character journey for him to go on, for, like, an alternate version of Matthew to go through all of that. And that's what I would really want to see for his Fallen version in a Forging Bonds. But I think that just about wraps things up here today. As you may know from my other videos, I love gushing about Matthew. I can talk about him, like, all day long because he's just my favorite and I love him a lot. So I have my fingers crossed, as always, that maybe we'll get a Matthew Waltz, you know, in the near future. I'm always ready with my big pile of orbs, just waiting for it. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you liked watching me draw and also ramble about Fallen banners and about Matthew and Forging Bonds events and stuff. Whatever you thought of the video, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you have like thoughts about if you'd want to see more videos like this in the future, just let me know. Otherwise, that's going to be it for today. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and Gemini out.